Hello, I'm Jason Lightoller from Woodside, and tonight we're going to be talking about tuck and slip stitches and the varying details between them. This is as a result of a request from a subscriber who submitted a form because they were having difficulties with the technique. So we're going to be concentrating on a punch card machine, specifically a 24 stitch repeat machine. However, it doesn't make any difference if you're using a 12 stitch or an 18 stitch machine. The principles are exactly the same. The difference between the two stitch types is that with a tuck stitch, the strand of yarn on the needles that is not selected is held in the hook of the needle, which will form a loop. With a slip stitch, the strand of yarn will bypass the non-selected needle as the row is knit, and what that will do is it will form a float in between the stitches. I'll be showing you this a little bit later on as we review the work that we've done. Now, bearing that in mind, it's important that you select the correct punch card. If you're using an electronic machine, it's not so difficult because the machine will actually show you which is the correct stitch to use for slip or tuck. However, I've used an electronic machine for about 6 weeks and then I sold it on. Do not ever underestimate what your punch card machine can do. I could never exhaust what my punch card machine could ever do, and for me it's absolutely limitless. Now, this is a fairly basic punch card and you can easily identify that it is suitable for tuck stitch because it has only a single area where there is an unpunched section in a column. So as you can see here, these are the punched areas in the card and this is an unpunched area. Here are more punched areas and this is an unpunched area here. And it's important that you don't have more than one column of an unpunched area. So this is just one column here, and then you've got 3 areas of punched sections, and then this is one column of unpunched areas here. And that's really important because if you have 2 columns of unpunched areas and you try to do a tuck stitch with that, it won't work. The machine will jam and everything will get caught up. All these unpunched areas represents the needles that will hold the stitches in the hook, which is why it's important that you get the correct stitch for the correct card. For a slip stitch, it's slightly different. Now, there are certain cards for certain manufacturers that do identify quite clearly which card should be used for which stitch, and that's quite freely available on the internet. Now, it is impossible for me to show you exactly what settings your machine needs to be on because there are so many different machines and so many different settings. You will need to refer to the manufacturer's instruction, and there are virtually every download available for the knitting machines that are out there nowadays. Even the vintage machines, you just have to search online for a download and you will be able to see how to set the machines for the various different stitches. So to use this card for a tuck and a slip stitch, for a tuck stitch, what it will do, the machine will knit these 3 stitches. It will hold this particular stitch here in the unpunched area. It will hold it in the hook of the needle. It will then knit another 3 stitches, and this stitch will be held in the loop. These 3 will be knit, this will be held in the loop, and these 3 will be knit, and this will be held in the loop, and so on and so forth. It will do that all the way along. And as the card moves down, it will repeat it. So again, these 3 stitches will be knit and this one will be held in the same needle. This stitch here will be held in the same needle, and these 3 will be knit, and again this stitch will be held in the same hook, the same needle hook, and it will go along and do that until you actually get right up here, and then the reverse will happen. So by now there will be 4 stitches in the same hook. When it gets to this row, it will knit them off, and therefore it will actually cause a tuck, which is why it's called a tuck stitch, and then the reverse will happen. So instead of knitting here, these stitches will be tucked. And for a slip stitch, what will happen is that these will be knitted, this will be carried across this needle here, and that will be a float. These will be knitted, that will be a float, and so on and so forth. So you will have, as the card and the rows get knitted, these will actually be floats. So you'll get 1, 2, 3, 4 floats, and then it will move across. So then you'll get 3 knit stitches and 4 floats, and so on and so forth. So what I've done here is I've used a cast on comb and knit a few rows of stockinette stitch. Now, I don't normally use cast on combs. I normally use just a rag to cast on. When I'm doing tuck or slip stitches, this is the only time I would ever consider using a cast on comb. I don't normally like them. I find that they get in the way. Now, just a few words about tension. This particular yarn normally knits at tension 7, and for tuck or slip stitches you need to consider increasing your tension, so you want a looser stitch size. So what I've done is I've gone up by one whole number and one dot. So in this case it's at tension 8 and 1 dot. I've also got the weaving brushes engaged because you want the stitches to remain in the hooks, because otherwise they tend to jump out. And what I've done is I've done the memorizing row, I have unlocked the punch card, and I've set it to rotate at every row. The elongation function is useful for Fair Isle, but it isn't really effective for tuck or slip stitches because it tends to bunch up in the needles and it doesn't knit off properly. So when you are knitting tuck stitches or slip stitches or any other patterning, you need to knit at a slower than normal rate, and also obviously ensure that you pass each end of the knitting with the carriage by at least 10 centimeters. So everything is ready to go and we'll just start now. So I'm going to stop there, and what I'm going to do is just zoom in so you can see what we've done. And as you can see, here is the tuck stitches that are quite nicely formed, and here are the stitches that have been held in the needles and then knitted off at the subsequent rows. I'm now just going to knit a few rows of stockinette stitch and we will go to slip stitches. Now if I was knitting a longer piece, then obviously I would be moving the weights up accordingly, so at intervals along the knitting bed here, and then knitting accordingly. But as this is only a short sample, I don't need to do that. So what I've done now is I have relocated the card back to row 1. I have moved the cam lever to slip stitch, or sometimes known as skip or even part, and then I'm going to knit some rows using the same card design in slip stitch. So that's slip stitches now that we've knitted on the machine. I'll just zoom in and show you what that looks like. And we'll have a closer look, of course, when we take it off the machine. I'm just going to now knit some stockinette and then we will remove it. So you can also do something called two-colour tuck stitch, and the effect is actually on the right side of the garment. And what you do is exactly the same as what we've just done before. You start at row 1 of the card and you change the colour every 2 rows. I've already done the first 2-row colour, and I'm now going to go back and do another 2 rows in white. And you then keep changing every 2 rows for your contrast colour, and in this case the contrast is obviously white. I'm going to go back to the main yarn in orange and then change again to the contrast, which is white, and you keep going to the desired amount of rows that you need in this 2-colour change. When we take this off the machine, I'll show you what it looks like. I'm just going to do another few rows in stockinette and then we will do some 2-colour slip. So again, we are set up in slip stitch and I'm going to do 2 rows in the main yarn, which is orange. And I'm going to change for the contrast, which is white. And it's just as we did when we did the 2-colour tuck stitch. we are going to be changing every 2 rows. And we will continue to do this until we just get a few rows so I can show you what it looks like. When you're doing 2-color tuck or slip stitches, you don't have floats on the back. It's actually a floatless design. It's not like Fair Isle where you do get floats on the back of the fabric. This one is a floatless design, which is why you have to change in the main yarn feeder every 2 rows. Some of the designs you can change every 4 rows. It's entirely up to you. You just need to make a swatch and see which one works best for you. Okay, we've done a few rows of that, so we're back to stockinette stitch now. I'm just going to do a few rows of that and we'll take it off the machine. So this is the sample that we worked on earlier. This is the tuck stitch sample, and above it is the punch card. So as you can see, this here is the 4 rows of stitches that were held in the unpunched areas. So the unpunched areas represent the 4 rows of knitting that held 1 stitch. So here in this section is 4 stitches that were held in 1 needle. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is this 1 needle here. There are another 4 rows here held in this needle, and so on and so forth. As the card rotates, it gets to that section here and it will move and it will be knitted off here. And it will do that infinitum, providing your card is locked together. So this is this representation here. This is the tucked area, which represents this, and this is the knitted area here. So here are 3 stitches, which is this part. Here is the tucked stitch, which is that part there. And on the reverse side, it looks like that. It's nothing fancy. It's quite unimpressionable. You could use that side if you wanted to, but tuck stitch is mainly used on the purl side of the fabric. And the same for slip stitch. I'll just zoom in there so you can see. Here are the 4 floats, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and that would account for this unpunched area here for 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, and here are the knitted rows here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, which represents 1, 2, 3, 4, and for the 3 stitches, so that would be 1, 2, 3, and that's how it works for all that time. And as I said, it will do that infinitum until you actually stop. This is slip stitch on the right side of the fabric. Again, it's hardly noticeable, but the idea is that you use the purl side, which is there. Now this is 2-color tuck stitch on the right side of the fabric. This is what we did when we changed the yarn every 2 rows, and you can get many different variances depending on what position you change your yarn. So if you changed it, instead of on the first row, if you changed it on the second row, you get a square design, for instance. That's what it looks like on the right side, and on the wrong side it looks like that. On the slip stitch, that's what this looks like. Again, you could change it every 4 rows, or you could change it in the middle. So instead of starting on row 1, you start on row 2 and then change it every 2 rows, for instance. The choice is down to you, but as I always say, make a swatch. And on the inside, that's what it looks like. And as with the tuck stitch, there are no floats. So make sure that you do a sample first of all and decide which one works best for you, and do experiment with how many rows you do for your yarn changes and whereabouts on the punch card that you want to make those yarn changes, because you can get some very interesting effects just by doing one particular swap.